welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Khvat. Mark Esper previously served as US Defense Secretary in the Trump administration between July 2019 and November 2020, when he was fired by the president, who wanted to use the US military to control widespread protests across America. Esper held former roles as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and Commissioner on the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. His last active duty posting in the US military was as a war planner in the Indo-Pacific from 2002 to 2004. We begin with the former Defense Secretary's thoughts on Washington's arming Taiwan from America's own military stocks, as it has done for war-torn Ukraine. The first presidential drawdown authority for Taiwan will transfer weapons from the US's existing stockpiles. But Taiwan is not at war. So what message does this send?
Well, I think it sends a very positive message of support, not just from the White House, but from the Congress, because Congress is the one that granted the authority, and not just for the $345 million that was approved initially, but for up to $1 billion. And the aim, of course, is to help Taiwan build its defensive capability in order to deter Chinese aggression.
China hasn't renounced force to annex democratically self-ruled Taiwan. Beijing responded to the drawdown authority by warning the US to stop so-called military collusion with Taiwan. It said America is going down a dangerous path. Beijing, of course, has lashed out, and they have said that this actually represents a shift in US policy.
Not at all. I mean, if you go back to the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, it committed the United States to providing Taiwan the means to defend itself.
The US will make available to Taiwan such defense articles in such quantity as may be necessary to enable Taiwan to maintain a self-defense capability. The Taiwan Relations Act, the law governing how America must conduct its relations with Taiwan, doesn't state that arms must be provided through sales.
I think there's no question that the balance of power today in the Taiwan Strait versus, let's say, 20 years ago is completely mismatched between what Beijing possesses and what Taipei possesses. I mean, China now has the largest army in the world, the largest navy in the world, a very large air force, a space capability, cyber capability, 2 million plus man army. Taiwan's numbers in each of those regards pales in regard to the PRC. So it's just ridiculous for Beijing to suggest that somehow the balance of power in the Strait has been turned upside down by the arms sales or increasing arms sales. If anybody's been twisting and contorting policy, if not breaking policy over the last 50-some years, it's been the PRC, not the United States and not Taiwan.
Is one of the reasons Esper argues in his book, A Sacred Oath, there should be a review of the US's One China policy, the basis for Washington's recognition of Beijing.
The United States One China policy goes back to 1972, so it's now 51 years old. And my concern was, can the One China policy of 1972 bear the weight of everything that's happening these days in the Taiwan Strait, between the United States, between the PRC, and between Taiwan?
Analysts say US-China relations have sunk to their lowest in decades, while tensions in the Taiwan Strait are at their highest.
In the last few years alone, we've seen under Xi Jinping dramatic increases in the number of incursions across the median line in the Taiwan Strait. We now see Chinese ship and aircraft and drones patrolling, if you will, around the entire island. So in my view, it's Beijing again that is taking aggressive actions in violation of the various communiques that have transpired over the decades and is really pushing the envelope.
In the TRA, it makes clear that the US decision to establish diplomatic relations with China rests upon the expectation that the future of Taiwan will be determined by peaceful means.
That any attempt to do so by non-peaceful means would be of grave concern to the United States, which is diplomatic message for us considering employing military force and other means to do that.
But asked to clarify his suggested update to the One China policy, whether he means recognizing Taiwan, he says this.
I don't believe in recognition right now and declaring independence. I think that is, clearly a big red flag for Beijing, and I don't think it's necessary for Taiwan. I think time is on Taiwan's side here.
One of the ways Esper believes things should change, just like Antony Blinken, Justin Trudeau, and countless European politicians and Taiwan allies, is for Taiwan to be admitted into certain UN bodies where there are health or safety reasons.
In my view, there's no reason why Taiwan shouldn't be part of international organization. Through COVID, we had 23 million Taiwanese possibly exposed to COVID, but not necessarily linked to the WHO. And of course, I might note that Taiwan did really well with its policy. So there's that. There's ICAO, other organizations where I think Taiwan should be allowed membership without necessarily conferring sovereignty as a country, right? Which is the line even the United States doesn't want to see either side provoke.
Now, Taiwan wasn't always on the outside. When the United Nations was established post-World War II, Taiwan, or the Republic of China, had been one of its founding members with a permanent seat at the Security Council. The People's Republic of China, or Beijing, replaced Taipei as the China representative following Resolution 2758 in 1971. Taiwan has long condemned China for intentionally misinterpreting the United Nations resolution to claim that Taiwan is part of China and argue against Taiwan's membership of the UN system. This is the actual wording of the resolution. The UN General Assembly decides to restore all rights to the PRC as the only legitimate representatives of China to the UN and to expel forthwith the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was the Chinese Nationalist Party leader who lost the Chinese Civil War to the Communists and decamped to Taiwan. He ruled Taiwan with an iron fist from 1949 to 1975 through martial law and a period of government abuses and oppression known as the White Terror. In July, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Taiwan International Solidarity Act, which was an amendment of the previous Taipei Act. It calls on the U.S. to oppose any attempts by China to, quote, resolve Taiwan's status by distorting the decisions, language, policies, or procedures of any international body the U.S. is a member of. It states that the resolution did not address the issue of representation of Taiwan and its people in the UN, nor did the resolution take a position on the relationship between the PRC and Taiwan. In his memoir, Esper also describes how Beijing has, quote, successfully distorted Washington's one China policy in the minds of many around the world, including the US. The fact is, US policy does not accept China's sovereignty over Taiwan, as Beijing would like everyone to believe. Rather,
we acknowledge, not recognize, but acknowledge
China's position in the 1972 Shanghai Communique.
So, look, I think that, again, the Chinese government in Beijing have been the ones who have distorted one China policy, who've been kind of breaking and bending the precepts of it for the past 50 plus years.
From his decades of observing China, Esper sees in its current economic woes a potential turning point for the Chinese Communist Party.
What we've seen from China in the past 50 years is to bring hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, out of the rural areas, and bring them a better quality of life. And particularly with their entry into WTO in 2000, 2001, which the United States pushed. And that has been the formula. That's been the tacit agreement between the Chinese Communist Party and the people of China. That is, we will deliver economic growth and prosperity, and in return, you will keep your mouth shut and abide by what the party does when it comes to politics and security and those things. And the question is that agreement starting to run out? Is it starting to wither, given the economic problems China faces?
Problems including a sinking GDP, a shrinking and aging population, and high unemployment, especially among young people. So, are the tenets holding China's domestic harmony together beginning to weaken, as Beijing's foreign relations with the West already have? In his memoir, Esper writes of another broken tenet, that China's economic freedom would lead to the people's political freedoms. In your book, you write about working for Senator Fred Thompson, and he was one of the very cautious voices on allowing China to enter sort of the international community.
Yeah, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, mostly everybody bought into this theory that if we can bring economic liberalization to China, then political liberalization will naturally follow. And 25 years later, 23 years later, we don't see that to be the case. In fact, under Xi Jinping, since 2013, we've seen more political repression, fewer rights, and more control by the government, contrary to where previous Chinese presidents were taking it. So Thompson's concern, my concern, there was a bipartisan group of members, was that we were so hungry to get into the China market and to reach those 1.3 billion consumers that we would end up selling China the means, the technology, all the things they need to compete with us, to challenge us, to become a superpower. And regrettably, they were correct.
In 2017, the Trump administration ushered in a radical shift in the US's China policy. It stated the challenges Beijing posed to the American economy, security, and values. In today's world, the language is familiar, but back then it was groundbreaking. The 2017 National Security Strategy stated China's aims to, quote, displace the US in the Indo-Pacific region, expand the reach of its state-driven economic model, and reorder the region in its favor. The subsequent defense strategy stated Beijing's desire for the PLA to become a practical instrument of its statecraft with an active role in the PRC's foreign policy. This marked a complete departure from Barack Obama's 2016 strategy, which said, the scope of our cooperation with China is unprecedented, even as we remain alert to China's military modernization. The United States welcomes the rise of a stable, peaceful, and prosperous China. The West's loss of innocence over China have driven increased support for Taiwan since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Drawing parallels between Taiwan and Ukraine, representatives from global democracies have visited Taiwan and issued statements of support in the face of Chinese aggressions and coercion. But President Tsai Ing-wen and Foreign Minister Joseph Wu have been clear that Taiwanese cannot ask for help to deter China unless they are willing to fight themselves. In a move seen as unpopular, Tsai increased the country's military service from 4 months to 1 year starting in 2024.
Will the Taiwanese people arm and fight like the Ukrainian people do? I've argued that I think that's the most important thing that the Taiwan can do to build a capable deterrent, is to make sure that the nation is ready to rally and is trained and willing to defend itself. And I think that was, if you look at what happened in Ukraine, I think when Ukraine was invaded in 2014, they were not in a position to defend themselves like they are today. And Ukraine learned the lessons in 2014. They began rearming, training, doing other things. And, when the big invasion came last year, they were ready to fight for their country, their sovereignty. And that's important.
The Ukrainians received 6-7 years of training from the US. I understand that the Presidential Drawdown Authority will also include training and education.
Well, look, I've argued since China has ramped up its activities across the Taiwan Strait and around Taiwan that we should also amp up our activities. I think we should increase training and exercises, because all Beijing is doing is whittling down the standards and norms that have kept the peace for 50 years in the Strait. And so I think we need to push back. But it's not the only thing. It's the fighting spirit. It's the willingness of the people to defend their country. And when you have those things, people learn quickly to fight. And it's a much different thing if you're China looking across the Taiwan Strait, thinking that you have to attack against 150,000, 180,000 active duty Taiwanese force versus millions of Taiwanese men and women willing to fight for their country. In your book, you also write about the care that preparation for war shouldn't become self-fulfilling. Can you tell me about, the difficulty in this, or do you believe, should it be that strength equals peace? Well, I'm a big believer as a Reagan Republican in President Ronald Reagan's, our 40th president, in his mantra of peace through strength. And so I think weakness invites aggression. I think weakness conveys vulnerability. It conveys an unwillingness, if you will, to fight and prepare, whereas strength is just the opposite. So I think when you're dealing with authoritarian states like China, I think building up your defenses, showing a willingness to fight, all those things actually keeps the peace. It may create some friction and some tension, but I think at the end of the day, it keeps the peace. Esper says he wrote the memoir because the last year of the Trump administration was a very consequential period.
For US-Taiwan relations, this was also true. One of the most significant policy changes was effected by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, removing restrictions on high-level US officials to interact with their Taiwanese counterparts. These moves made Trump highly popular in Taiwan. But what were his real views about Taiwan? Does Esper agree with the account by Trump's former US National Security Advisor, John Bolton?
John Bolton writes about how Trump saw Taiwan versus China, basically the point of his pencil versus the president's desk. What sense did you get of how President Trump valued Taiwan?
I think he saw the Chinese relationship much bigger, much more important than the Taiwan relationship, for sure. President Trump really, I think in many ways, went out of his way to engage Xi Jinping. He was trying to pursue that close personal relationship with him. He felt that he had a bond. I don't think that's the case. I think Xi Jinping played that relationship based on what was in Beijing's national interests. But it really wasn't until the last 8 months or so of the administration when COVID took over the country, the world, and so much of it was tracked back to Beijing, Wuhan, that Trump took a much harder line against Beijing.
Despite recent indictments, Donald Trump isn't disqualified for standing for president. He could still be voted into office in 2024.
What would the implications be for Taiwan?
I suspect he'd probably stop arming Ukraine and maybe even go as far as withdraw from NATO. And if that's the case, that would, of course, undermine not just European and Asian security, but it would undermine our own national security. By extension, I think you may not see a strong commitment to Taiwan.
Do you think that Xi Jinping would like Trump to be the next US president?
Probably. I don't know. You'd have to ask him, but probably, because I think Trump is unconventional in that way in terms of maintaining, what has been 7 decades or so of a largely continuous U.S. foreign policy of engagement in the world and leadership. And I think it's been that American leadership, defending democracy, defending international rules and norms, standing up for rights and freedoms around the world, that has really marked the United States as the leader, as the global leader, the superpower. And again, I think Trump's view is more isolationist, far more isolationist than that.
According to Esper, an isolationist America under Trump would spell the withdrawal of American troops across Asia, and with that, a series of unintended global consequences, including possible nuclear rearmament.
What sort of impact do you think that would have on countries like Japan and South Korea in terms of their security?
Well, it's all speculation, right? It's a hypothetical, but if you withdraw American troops, it opens up a vulnerability, a weakness. It signals maybe that you wouldn't come to their defense, even though we have a treaty. It might prompt Japan to do even more than it's doing today, to their credit, by the way, but do even more today with regard to building up their own defensive and offensive capability now. And in some cases, countries have talked about, as Korea has, should they build their own nuclear deterrent. So you could see in some scenarios a cascade of things that proceed that actually increase tension, that increase instability, that maybe provoke the autocrats around the world, again, whether they're in Beijing or Tehran or Moscow, to act, to do something, or at least amp up their bad behavior.
For years, Foreign Minister Joseph Wu has warned that Taiwan is on the front line of democracy. He says if Taiwan were to fall, there would be a domino effect across the region.
Beijing has made it clear of their intentions for Taiwan, and we can see from their actions what they want for the East and South China Seas. Do you believe that China has imperialistic ambitions beyond these areas?
Well, China has told us that by 2049, they clearly want to dominate the Asia-Pacific, and by extension, they want to drive the global order. They want to change international rules and norms. So I don't know how you describe that, imperialistic, expansionistic, you name it, but they want to be able to control, again, international rules and norms. They want to adjust them to their own benefit.
So while Esper doesn't believe China has further territorial ambitions, he is clear on Beijing's desire to dominate. And does Xi have a partner in Vladimir Putin to carry out the reshaping of the world order?
Russia is a key partner obviously, for China. And I'm just curious because when you were drafting the National Defense Strategy, that was way before the No Limits Partnership. To you, what does this No Limits Partnership between the two biggest autocracies?
Well, the National Defense Strategy that we were implementing in 2019, 2020 during my period, it was my top priority. We had identified China, then Russia, as our top threats, our top competitors, adversaries. And so it was very clear to me that that was the order to treat them. And it was very clear at the time that they were working together, that they were cooperating. And I think we've seen that only strengthen in the past 18 months or so since Ukraine's invasion. Now, they did speak about a no limits partnership, but clearly there are limits. Russia would like to have lethal weapons from China, and China has yet to cross that Rubicon. If they did so, that would be very troubling. But I do think we need to be concerned about the partnership between these two countries. And you got to look at it in different ways too. China is a net importer of energy, and Russia is a net exporter. So there's a relationship there that both countries want to maintain. And clearly, in the previous years, Russia has exported a lot of high-end advanced military technology that China needs. So there is a relationship there that they want to continue. I think at this point, though, it's increasingly clear, and I write about this in my book, by the way, that Russia is becoming a vassal state of China and not a peer in any sense of the word, except maybe when it comes to strategic capabilities. But economically, culturally, other ways, they are becoming a vassal state, a secondary state to China.
Does Beijing's domination, even of its best friend and no limits partner Moscow, spell the inevitability of China's ascendancy? Perhaps not, according to a Pew survey. When it comes to soft power, in 22 of 23 countries, respondents view the US more favorably than unfavorably. For China, this was only true in 6 countries: Argentina, Indonesia, Kenya, Mexico, Nigeria, and South Africa.
They don't like the scrutiny that the West puts on how they treat their people, how they deny them rights and liberties and freedoms, and they want to expand in that way. So it's a very unsettling future for the democracies of the world to look at that, and knowing that's how Xi Jinping treats his people internally is likely how he wants to treat and how he will treat countries externally.
If there is one thing the past 20 years seem to indicate, it's that the more Beijing seeks global power, the more it loses influence.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.